Masechet Gittin, Daf Kaf Gimel. We have two Mishnayot today. The first one is about who is competent to write a get, and the second one is who is competent to deliver a get. So, Hakol Kishrin Lichtovet a get, Afilu Cheresh Shotev Katan. Anyone can write a get, even a deaf person or someone who's mentally incompetent or a child. Haisha kotebet et gita, vaish koteb et shobaro, she'en kiyum get ela behot mav. A woman can write a get, and even the wife herself can write her own get. And in parallel, a man can write the receipt for his payment of the ketubah, even though eventually, if the woman writes it, she has to give it to the husband so that the husband can give it to her. And the other way around also, if the man is writing the receipt, he has to give it to the wife so that when she receives the payment, she can give the receipt to the husband. So even though the person writing it is going to be the ultimate receiver of it, that's okay, because the get has to be ratified by the signatures. So therefore, there's no problem of the woman writing the text of the get, and then she's not going to keep it because she has to give it to the husband so that the husband can have people sign it, and then he will give it back to her. Therefore, that's totally fine. All right, now we're asking about Cheresh Shotev Katan. They are not mentally competent, so how could they write the get? Amar Rav Huna, Vehu Shehya Gadol Omed Al Gabav. We're going to have three answers to this question, and the first one by Rav Huna is that there is an adult standing over the Cheresh Shotev Katan, and thereby making sure, telling them, listen, as you're writing this is going to be Leshem, this woman, right? It has to be Lishma. And so these people, even though they're not fully competent, but they have enough knowledge, they know how to write, enough knowledge that the adult there, standing there, will say, okay, when you're writing this, it's going to be for this man, for this woman, right? Right. So that is sufficient to fulfill Lishma. All right, that's the one answer. Now, Amar le Rav Nachman, Ela me'ata goy v'Yisrael omed al gabav hachinam dechaser v'chitem hachinam v'hatanya goy pasul. Rav Nachman says, wait a second. If there is a Jew standing over him, then a non-Jew who's writing the get also should be fine, right? Because what are you worried about? That he's not going to be writing it lishma. Obviously, he's talking about a non-Jew who is a scribe. He knows how to write well. So you're worried that he's not going to write lishma, but have a Jew standing over him, telling him that you're writing this lishma. And if you say, yes, indeed, I want to include the non-Jew can also write it, but that's impossible because the Braita that says a non-Jew is disqualified from writing a get. And the answer, so after Rav Nachman's challenge to Rav Huna can answer, Goy l'datet nafshe avad. A goy who is an adult is mentally competent, and he's writing it according to his own will. So it actually makes it worse that he is an adult who's mentally competent. If you have a child or someone else who's not mentally competent, fully mentally competent, they have a little competence, they know how to write. But since they don't have full mental competence, therefore the adult Jew standing over them will tell them, listen, you are writing for the sake of this man and this woman, and that's fine. The problem with the non-Jew adult is that he has a full mind of his own, and therefore even with a Jew adult standing there telling him, I want you to write it L'Shem, this man and this woman, he may have in mind, says, no, I don't feel like doing that. I'm going to have in mind that's going to be for something else, for someone else. And so his full da'at actually works against the possibility of a goy writing. So that's how Rav Huna could answer the question. So Rav Huna is still good. Hadar amar Rav Nachman lav miletahi damari. And later on, Rav Nachman changed his mind. And he says, you know what? In fact, I think that a non-Jew can write a get. He's going to know this from the next Mishnah that we're going to see in a few minutes. The next Mishnah says a non-Jew is not allowed to be an agent to deliver the get. And it has a similar list as our Mishnah and adds in goy. So by comparing the Mishnah that we just had to the next Mishnah, it's evident that only in the next Mishnah about delivering a goy cannot do it. But in this Mishnah, which doesn't mention goy, the contrast is clear. That for writing the get, it's clear that the goy can do it. And so he says, in fact, forget my question. I think that a non-Jew can write the get. And if you'll ask, how could a non-Jew write the get? He has a mind of his own, and he's not necessarily gonna write it lishma, even if there's a Jew standing over him. So Rav Nachman actually is giving a completely new answer, and we're going to see it elaborated in just one paragraph. Rav Nachman is going to say that our Mishnah is actually the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who does not require that the get be written lishma. And therefore, anyone can write it. A goy can write it because it doesn't need to be written lishma. It's no problem. You just need someone who knows how to write. Okay, now before we get to that, we have to ask him about this Baraita. V'hatanya goy pasul. Baraita clearly says that a non-Jew cannot write the get. How can you just say now that a non-Jew can write the get? Hahid Rabbi El-Azari damar edem isira karte uba'inan ketivad lishma v'havadai goy adate denafshe ka'abid. That Baraita is the opinion of Rabbi El-Azar. That's Rabbi El-Azar the Tana ben Shamua, who says that the witnesses of delivery are the main ones that effectuate the divorce. And because those witnesses are the most important, therefore you don't need witnesses to sign the document. Since you don't need witnesses to sign the get, so in order to have lishma, you cannot just have the witnesses signing lishma, because you don't even need witnesses at all. Therefore, the writing has to be lishma. Right? We saw this yesterday, that Rabbi Elazar, because he emphasizes the witnesses to the delivery, and so he has no necessary witnesses to the signing. Therefore, he puts greater importance to the writing of the get, because there is no signing of the get. So he needs the ketivat to be lishma. And if a non-Jew writes it, then a non-Jew may very well be writing it for his own will, and we don't know what he has in mind. And we can't stand over him and tell him, because he has a mind of his own. Therefore, according to Rav Nachman, this Baraita has the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, but our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Now let's see. Amar Rav Nachman, Omer haya Rabbi Meir, afilu misal ba'ashpa hatamo untano la kasher. Rav Nachman explained that according to Rabbi Meir, even if Rav Nachman is reporting that he has a tradition in the name of Rabbi Meir, that even if someone found a get in the garbage, and it happened to be, he opens it up and has the same names as the people that he wants to use it for, right? It was written for some other Avraham and Sarah, and now he finds it in the garbage. Oh, look, Avraham and Sarah, same name, same everything. You can sign it and give it, and that would be totally fine. Why? Because Rabbi Meir says that it's the edeh hatima karte. It's the witnesses that sign it. They're the ones that effectuate the divorce, and therefore it doesn't matter who wrote it, who they wrote it for, as long as it was written. All you need is that the witnesses will sign it lishma and give it, and that is kosher. Okay, good. So we're now connecting, right, a lot of things together. We're connecting the famous machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar about which witnesses are needed, with the need for when do you have to have lishma? Rabbi Elazar says you need lishma for the writing, and so that baraita would be for the writing. This baraita the goy can't do it, would be Rabbi Elazar, and according to Rav Nachman, our Mishnah is actually Rabbi Meir and does not require lishma, and that's why any of these people can write it, even without an adult standing over them. All right. Now we have a few challenges, 3 challenges to Rav Nachman. Vechatav la lishma, my love ketivat haget. So Rav Nachman, according to you, your interpretation of Rabbi Meir, and now we're assuming that these sources are all to be me'ir. The pasuk says, "V'chatav la," the man has to write it for the sake of this woman, meaning for lishma, right? Isn't that referring to the writing of the get? It says the word v'chatav. And Rav Nachman can answer la hatimat adim. Maybe when it says v'chatav, it's referring to the signatures, which are also written. And so you're writing a lot of things. So the writing doesn't necessarily have to mean the writing of the text of the get. It can mean the writing of the signatures, has to be for her sake. Good. Iti beherava kol get shenichtav shelo lishum isha pasul. The first challenge was from a pasuk. The second challenge is from a derasha on the pasuk. The second challenge is from a mishnah later on, tomorrow, is daf that says any get that was written not for the sake of this particular woman is no good. So obviously a get has to be written lishma ema shenechtam shelo lishum isha pasul. No, I can interpret that when it's, even though it says nichtav here, I'll interpret that as referring to the signatures. If it's written without the not for the sake of a certain woman, then it's pasul. And again, even though it says nichtav, which a simple reading would mean to write the get, but you also are writing the signatures, so he says no, it's only the signatures. Now we have another challenge from a braita, kishehu kotvo ki'ilu kotvo lishma. If a person writes a get, then it's as if he's writing the whole thing lishma. And meaning, if he writes part of the get lishma, right, and we know that part of the get he wrote lishma when he's writing it, then we can assume that the whole thing he's also writing for her sake. That's what the braita says. Now, what does that mean? Which part is he writing lishma? Which part not? Ma'alav kishu kotvo la toref lishma, kilo kotvo la tofes lishma. Does it not mean that when he's writing the toref, the essential part of the get, which is the names, date, place, and the main formula that you need, if you write that part lishma, then it's as if you wrote the entire rest of it. The standard formulation or any extra conditions that you put in is also considered to be lishma. But you see from here that all of the writing, or at least some of the writing itself, has to be lishma, and this is a challenge to your interpretation of Rabbi Meir, Rav Nachman, and he can answer la kishu chotmo lishma kilu kotvo lishma. No, what this baraita means to say is that if you're, as long as you sign it for the sake of a woman, that's the partial writing. Then it's as if you wrote the whole thing lishma as well. It's just everything follows a signature. That's one answer. He could say or another answer for all three questions that we just had is that none of those sources were the first one was a derasha on a pasuk, the second one a mishnah, the third one a beraita. It says Hane Matnitin, right? All these Tanaitic sources. The first one also is a Midrash Halacha, could be a Tanaitic source on a pasuk. All these are not the opinion of Rabbi Meir. They're all the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says that the witnesses of transmission are the ones that affect the divorce, and because he doesn't need a deh hatima, so he needs the writing to be lishma. That's those sources. But I maintain, Rav Nachman says, that Rabbi Meir would disagree with all those sources altogether, and because he does not require the writing to be lishma. All right, so far so good. Now we have two answers to the first starting question. The question was, how could a child or someone incompetent write a get? Don't they have to write it lishma? And the first answer assumed that it was the opinion, the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who requires it to be written lishma, but there's an adult standing by them. Good. That was the first answer. According to that, a non-Jew would not be able to, because he has a mind of its own. That was the first answer of Rav Huna. Second answer of Rav Nachman is our Mishnah is actually not Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir does not require the writing to be lishma, and therefore all of these incompetent people and a child and even a non-Jew who is competent but has a will of his own, all that's fine, because all you need is someone who knows how to write. But you don't need it to be written lishma. And now we have a third answer. Rav Yehuda Shemuel, vehu sheshir mekom hatoref, echen amar Rabbi Chaga mishmei de'ula, vehu sheshir mekom hatoref, ve'Rabbi Elazar hi. Shemuel agrees that this is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who does require that it be written lishma, but he says, it makes an ukimta, not that adult is standing over it, but rather that the scribe left the torif. When it says that a child is writing it, or someone incompetent, they're only writing the tofes first. They're kind of leaving room. They're leaving room for the name and the place and the date, the essential part, and they're just writing the standard formulas that are always in every get that you don't have to fill in. So they're writing that part and leaving blank the torif. And then someone else will come, and an adult scribe, and will fill in the torif. And so this is what Shemuel said, and this is also what Ula said. We had a similar answer yesterday to answer a similar problem. That this is Rabbi Elazar, and that he's not only wrote the tofes, not the torif. But Rabbi Zerika Amar Rabbi Yochanan ena Torah. Now Rabbi Zerika, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says this is not a teaching. Now, what does that mean? My ena Torah. What is not a teaching? Amar Rabbi Abba kano diachash en koach lishma ve'Rabbi Meir hi de'amar adeh hatima karte. And now lishma, he says, is referring to that he's saying that this law of lishma has no force, right? There's no requirement for a get to be written lishma. And in fact, the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that it's the signatures that have to be lishma, and the signatures are necessary. And so this would be the same as the answer of Rav Nachman, that this Mishnah would be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Okay, good. Now we have one last question. Hold on, you just said this answer, the one that Rav Nachman said, you said it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, right, Rabbi Zerika. But Rabbi Bar Chana said, also in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, and it's talking about, right, a case where he wrote the tofes but not the torif. So we have a contradiction about what Rabbi Yochanan said, and the answer is Amora ninhu v'alibad Rabbi Yochanan. You're right. There is a machloket between two Amoraim about what Rabbi Yochanan taught, right? There's two versions of what Rabbi Yochanan taught. We just saw that Rav Nachman himself changed his mind. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind. Maybe one of the students misunderstood what he said. Whatever it is, yes, in fact, there's two different versions of Rabbi Yochanan. And so now we have those three different answers to how to interpret that Mishnah. Next Mishnah, Hakol kesherin lehavi et haget, hos meharesh, shote ve'katan, ve'soma ve'goy. Anyone can be an agent for a get. There's a discussion about if this is referring to an agent of the husband or an agent of the wife. It's surely referring to an agent of the wife. It looks like a simple reading is that it's an agency either way. So anyone can be an agent to bring the get, except for a deaf person, someone mentally incompetent, or a minor. And now this Mishnah is adding also a blind person and a non-Jew. So a blind person and non-Jew are mentally competent, so we'll have to talk about what's wrong with them. Now, kibel hakatan v'higdil haresh v'nitpakeach soma v'nitpateach shote v'nishtapa goy v'nitgayer pasul. Let's say someone changes status in the middle. If someone is received a get when they were a minor, as they were appointed when they were a minor, but then they became an adult, right? In the middle, while they're bringing it, it's no good because they were appointed when they were minors, so they were never appointed properly. And same thing if they were deaf when they were appointed, and then even if they became hearing later, if they were blind and then they were able to see in the middle, or if they were incompetent and then they got better. Or if there was a non-Jew and then he converted in the middle while he's bringing it, in all these cases, it is no good because the initial appointment as a shaliach was not proper. Aval pikech v'nitcharesh v'chazav v'nitpakeach. But if someone was able to hear, then and appointed, and then on the way, on the journey, he became deaf, but then he got better, only temporarily deaf, and he got better, and then he delivered it, that's fine. Or he could see, when he was appointed, but then he was not able to see temporarily, but then he could see again, and he delivers it, that's fine. Shafui v'nishtata v'chaza v'nishtapa kasher, or if someone was mentally competent, but then became incompetent and became competent again, and so when they finished their delivering or receiving the get, then they were once again competent, and they initially were competent when they were appointed. So in all these cases, that's fine. The general rule is anyone who is competent, all right, and notice that it's talking about mental competence here, sofa bedat, in the beginning and at the end, all these cases are fine. The Gemara will point out in a second that the da'at case it does apply to most of the ones above, but not about the blind person. A blind person has da'at all the way through. All right, bishlama cheresh shotev katan dela bene de'aninhu. So we understand that the first three, they don't have mental competence, and therefore they cannot be appointed to do something, because that something that requires a serious level of responsibility. And going name de la bar heterahu, a non-Jew is not allowed to be a messenger for this purpose, because they are not within the law of heter, meaning permission by divorce. The laws of Jewish marriage and Jewish divorce do not apply to non-Jews, and therefore, since they're not within the realm of these laws, they cannot be appointed as a messenger on behalf of someone who is bound by such laws. Ela soma amaylo. So now what's wrong with a blind person? This person is Jewish and is fully mentally competent. Because he can't see, he doesn't know who is giving him the get and who he's giving it to. He can't see, they can't properly identify the giver and the receiver, and that's an essential part of being a delivery agent. Matkif la Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef objects to this. Wait a second. If you're telling me that a blind person is never able to recognize anyone else, how could he ever be permitted to sleep with his wife? How does he know it's his wife? Maybe it's somebody else. He shouldn't be allowed. Or let's say people who can see. How could they be permitted to their wives at night? Remember, they didn't have electricity at night. It's pitch black at night. So how do you know that this person is actually your wife? Maybe you should say you're not allowed to be with your wives at night, because how can you properly identify if you can't see? Rather, just like in those cases of a person at night, there is also a way to recognize a person by voice. It's a very interesting phrase, tiviut ayna. Literally, it means the regularity of one's eye, that one's eye sees patterns and recognizes a person. After you see someone a couple of times, then you recognize that this is what they look like. Even though the word tiviut ayna is assuming facial recognition by sight, but the phrase becomes a phrase in and of itself, and then is attached to kala. So it means literally the recognition of sight by a voice. So recognition of sight just means recognition, which is usually by sight. Most people, they didn't have phones, so they weren't used to identifying people by voice. Usually, if you hear someone, then you also see them in those days. So recognizing that usually would be done by sight can also be done by voice when it's nighttime. And so therefore here we can say the same thing, that a blind person can very, very well recognize people by their voice, and he can receive the get from the husband, and he can deliver it to the wife without any trouble. So that can't be the reason. Ela amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says a different reason. The reason why a blind person cannot be a messenger is because this Mishnah is specifically talking about someone who brings a get from outside the land of Israel and needs to say it was written and signed in front of me, bifanai, which means he can't just hear the signature, he has to see the get being written and being signed. and a blind person cannot say it. So in fact, if it was being brought within Israel from one city to the next, and you don't have to say this formula, then a blind person could be a messenger. But here's the problem. He can't say it was written, I saw it written in front of me. Abaye says, hold on. According to you, if someone was able to see and then became blind on the way, then it should be okay, because he was able to see at the beginning. He saw the get being written and signed, and then on the way he became blind. But he's still totally competent. He's Jewish, so he should be able to deliver it. והקטן פתוח ונסתמה וחזר ונתפתח כשר, חזר ונתפתח אין, לא חזר ונתפתח לה. But we can infer from the Mishnah that is not true, because the Mishnah only says that if someone was seeing, then they became blind, then they became seeing again, then they are a good agent. But if so all that we can infer only if they were able to see again. But if they were seeing and then became blind and remained blind, then it would not be good. But according to your logic, that they should be valid. And the answer is, you're right. In fact, if someone was seeing and then became blind and remained blind, they would be a good agent, and it would be totally fine. Now, how come the Mishnah didn't say so? The Mishnah used the same formulation, by the way, because it was just continuing and copying the formulation of the previous clause. There was talking about someone who was mentally competent, became incompetent, and became competent again. And in that case, in fact, you do need him to return, because when he's appointed, he has to be competent. While he's traveling on the way, it's okay if he becomes incompetent, but when he delivers it, he has to be competent again. And so, since it had to have that formula there, where the Mishnah likes to have a repetitive style, and so it said the same thing regarding the blind person. He was seeing, then he became blind, then he became seeing. But in fact, for this case, even if he remained blind, it would be okay. אמר רב אשר די כנמי דקתני זה הכלל כל שתחילתו וסופו בדעת כשר ולא קטני כל שתחילתו וסופו בכשרות כשר שמאמינה. רב אשר says, you're not just backing this into the Mishnah. This is actually a good reading of the Mishnah, and can be seen from the last phrase when it gives a general statement, as we pointed out in the Mishnah. The generality at the end, the summary statement says, anyone whose beginning and end was with mental competence is good. And so it's referring specifically to the people who were not mentally or not mentally competent, like the mentally competent person or like the deaf person. Has to be both in the beginning and at the end. They have to be good. And it does not say anyone whose beginning and end was fit, meaning, fit as in seeing. It doesn't give a more general statement, but it focuses on competence, because in fact only the mental competence one has to be at the beginning and the end, but being sighted, being able to see, is only necessary in the beginning and is actually not necessary at the end. All right, good. Now we have a question about the status of a slave to be an agent. Note that the Mishnah talked about other cases like a non-Jew and others, but didn't talk about the status of a slave. Not the person's own slave, but just so you know, any slave. Can a Eved Kana'ani be a shaliach? See, the thing with an Eved Kana'ani is that they're kind of somewhere between a Jew and a non-Jew. Eved Kana'ani originally was not Jewish, and once they're freed, they will be fully converted and fully Jewish. While they're an Eved Kana'ani, they have to do mitzvot. It's the same to the same level as a woman does, but they aren't actually fully Jewish. It's the becoming free completes the conversion ceremony. So therefore, can they do it like a Jew, or are they like a non-Jew? Can a slave be an agent to receive a get of a woman from the husband? Right, the woman will tell a slave, go and receive a get on my behalf. And again, not her slave whose hand would be like her hand, but rather she just goes to a slave, someone else's slave, and say, be my agent. Amar lehu mideka pasil legoy michlal de'aved kasher. And Rabbi Ameh answered, well, in our Mishnah it says a non-Jew cannot be an agent, but it doesn't say anything about an Aved. So since it only talks about non-Jews, that means that an Aved can be an agent. Good. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Ameh. However, Amar Rabbi Rav Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, En ha'eved na'asa shaliach lekabel get leisha miyad ba'ala lefi she'eno betorat Gittin v'kiddushin. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and says that an Aved cannot be an agent to receive a get from the husband on behalf of the wife. Why? Because the servant, a slave, is not included in the laws of Gittin and Kiddushin. There is no halachic Kiddushin and Gittin for slaves. And so a slave has to be bound by the same rules in order to be an agent for that system. Matkif la Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar challenges Rabbi Yochanan. Tamad b'milata delete. Ava b'milata deite kasher. Rabbi Elazar asks Rabbi Yochanan, really, is that true that an Aved only cannot be an agent in matters of halacha which do not pertain to them? But what if there was a matter of halacha that does pertain to them? Then they would be able to be an agent? Here I have a counterexample. Here is an example of even a non-Jew or a Samaritan, who are basically more or less non-Jews, and they are included in certain halachot, right? The certain halachot that pertain to them, particularly Tirumot and Masrot. Itnan hagoy v'akuti shetarmu mishalahem tirumatam teruma. A non-Jew or a kuti who owns land in Israel, Samaritans, they lived in Israel, they own land in Israel, and non-Jews also can own land in Israel. So they are that land, the produce is still liable to teruma and maaser because it's growing in Israel. And so now, let's say a non-Jew wants to take teruma and maasrot on his own produce. Not that they have a problem of eating teruma, but let's say he wants to sell it to a Jew, and he can tell the Jew, listen, I grew this on my land in Israel. I already took terumot and maasrot, and so now you can have it. You don't have to take it again. So the Mishnah says, yes, that's okay. Their teruma is teruma. Furthermore, it says, Utanan goyshe taram shel Yisrael afil b'reshut and terumato teruma. But a non-Jew who performs the removal of teruma, the separation of teruma on behalf of a Jew, even with the Jew's permission, right? The Jew, as a farmer, he grows land in Israel, and he's not around, so he tells the non-Jew, do me a favor, be my shaliach, and take teruma on this produce for me, to separate it. That is no good. Now, this is interesting because even though the non-Jew, the laws of teruma pertain to the non-Jew, yet he cannot be a shaliach. My tama, why can't he be? La mishum dichtim Atem gam atem. Ma atem Yisrael af sheluchachem Yisrael. Is it not because this pasuk here is referring to Maaser Sheni and says Kentarimu gam atem. The gam in the simple reading is referring to the Leviim. Not only Yisrael have to give to the Maaser, even you, a Levi, you who received Maaser, you also have to give Turumat Maaser from everything. But that you didn't actually need the word gam. You could have said Kentarimu atem. So this atem, gam atem, the extra word gam, teaches that just as you are Jewish, so too, and the agent must be a full Jew. And that's the reason that even though non-Jews and slaves, for that matter, the laws of Turumah pertain to them, still they cannot be an agent. And so this is a counterexample that Rabbi Elazar cites against Rabbi Yochanan, and he's saying that, listen, even if the laws of Gittin and Kiddushin pertained to slaves and non-Jews, they still would not be able to be a shaliach because, right, of this derasha that says only someone who is Jewish can be a shaliach, no matter what the matter is, even if it's something that the laws pertain to. So that's the challenge. And Rabbi Yochanan can answer on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan. We can offer an answer. Amri Debe Rabbi Yanai will quote a statement from the school of Rabbi Yanai. La ma atem bnei berit af sheluchachem bnei berit. Don't say from the word atem gam atem. There's a slight variation, but it makes an important difference. The gam atem does not mean that you have to be a Yisrael, that you have to be fully Jewish in order to be an agent. It just means that you have to be bnei berit. You, just like you entered the covenant, so too your agents have to be people who entered the covenant. Now, a slave enters the covenant because you have to do a brit milah for an Eved Kena'ani, gets a brit milah, and is obligated in many of the mitzvot, all mitzvot, mitzvot lo ta'aseh, and mitzvot aseh, she lo hazman geraman. So even though the Eved Kenani is not fully Yisrael, he is ben berit. Literally, Brit Milah and other Shabbat and other things that are part of the Berit. And so therefore, this would explain why, and Bianai successfully explains why there's a distinction between a non-Jew and an Eved Kanani. A non-Jew is not Ben Berit, and therefore cannot be an agent at all. Not for things that the law doesn't pertain to them, and not even for things that the law does pertain to them, like Terumot Masrot, where a non-Jew can separate their own Terumah and Maaser, but cannot be an agent because they are not Ben Berit. However, an Eved who is Ben Berit can be a messenger for things that pertain to them, and therefore they would be able to be an agent for something like Terumah and Maaser. And the reason why they cannot be an agent for a get is only because the laws of Gittin and Girushin do not apply to Eved Kena'ani. All right, good. We now quote a longer version of the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. The one above was quoted by Rav Aseh, and this one includes that same quote, but continues on with an elaboration. And this one is in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, En ha'eved na'asa shaliach lekabel get isha miyad ba'ala, lefi she'eno betorat gitin v'kiddushin. So this we already saw. An eved cannot be a messenger to receive a get from the husband, because the laws of Gittin and Kiddushin do not pertain to him. ואף על פי ששנינו הרי את שפחה ובלדך בן חורין, אם הייתה עוברה זכתה לו. Now the second part is very difficult to explain, and that's why the Gemara is going to explain it. We're shifting from the laws of being a shaliach for a get to being a shaliach for a writ of emancipation. Now, the laws of emancipation do apply to avadim, obviously, and so a non-Jew can receive his own or her own get of emancipation. That works. An Eved also can be a messenger. So a master can give a third party Eved, right? Someone, his friend's Eved, can come to that Eved and say, here, receive this writ of emancipation on behalf of my slave. That can also happen because they can be a shaliach, they are ben berit, and this is laws that do apply to them. And now Rabbi Yochanan here is teaching something. Even though we have to explain that, even though we said that a master can give a writ of emancipation to his slave and say, you remain my maidservant, but you are pregnant and your child, this fetus, will be free. If she was pregnant, then it works, and the maidservant can receive the writ on behalf of the unborn child. Okay, now, so this is an afal. It's not really clear what's the afal here, but we understand there is a distinction that Rabbi Yochanan is making between an Eved being a shaliach for a get, which he cannot do because those laws do not apply to him, but can be a shaliach for a get of emancipation because those laws do apply. But why is he saying it specifically? What's special about a pregnant woman receiving it on behalf of her fetus? That we'll have to explain now. Mai im hayta ubara zachta lo. So what does that mean? What is this case? Ki ata Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda amar Rabbi Yochanan tarte amar. So when Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Yochanan is actually saying two separate things, right? Don't mix them together. Nir'im devarim sha'eved mekabel get lachavero miyad rabo shel havero, aval lo miyad rabo shelo. The first statement of Rabbi Yochanan was about an Eved receiving a get nashim. Those laws don't pertain to him, so he cannot be a shaliach for get nashim. The second is a different matter, and he said, it seems to me, it makes sense, that a slave can receive a get shichrur avadim on behalf of a different slave from the master of his friend, but not from his own master. In other words, if a master has two slaves, he cannot give the get to one slave on behalf of the other slave. The reason is because when a master gives something to a slave, the slave's hand is like his own, and therefore his own slave A receives it, and it's not going to be on behalf of slave B, no matter, even if they say so, because it's just going to go right back, slingshot back to the master, so he can't do it. On the other hand, if the master gives the get to a different slave, his friend's slave, so his friend's slave is not like his own hand, that person can be appointed as a messenger and say, receive this on behalf of my slave. That's fine, because it's not going to slingshot back to the master. He can receive it on behalf of his friend. So that's the presumption. Now, if a master gives a get to his own slave, that certainly does work, because in that case, even though the slave's hand is like the master's, the slave is also going free at the same time. So that works, because at the very same moment, simultaneously, he's receiving it and going free. And so we say that yes, they can. Those two events can happen at the same time, and he can receive because he's free at the moment he receives it. They happen simultaneously. He can receive his own thing and become free together. But if it's to a different slave of the same master, then that doesn't work, because the slave who's receiving it isn't going free. All right, good. So that's the second statement of Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Yochanan is now adding something more to this. Vim lechashcha adam lomar zo halacha shenuya im hayta ubara zachta lo emor lo shene gedolei hador pershu et hadabar Rabbi Zera veRabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. If someone should whisper a challenge to you and say, hold on, what Rabbi Yochanan said over here is not true, because we have a challenge from the following Baraita that says if she was pregnant, she can receive a get on behalf of her fetus. That's why it says the words af al pi shaninu. In other words, this whole thing that Rabbi Yochanan said here, that an Eved can receive something on behalf of a different slave from a different master, that you have to stick in between. It's kind of unsaid, it's assumed. And then after that is even though we said in a Braita, this Braita, nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan says, what I said is true. Okay, so that's it. This statement of Rabbi Yochanan is missing some words, or it's written in very shorthand. Okay, so we're expanding it. Now, what would be the challenge from this Braita? The Braita teaches that a slave woman can receive a get of a get shichrur on behalf of her fetus. Now, if we assume the fetus is a different being, is a separate, its own individual being, its own life, now we have one servant receiving a get on behalf of another servant, even though they're both owned by the same master. And yet it says it works. But according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, you said, no, it only makes sense that one servant can be a messenger to receive a get shichrur on behalf of a servant of a different master, but not of the same master. So what are you going to do with this baraita? If someone should ask you that, then you should tell him already. About two great sages explained it. Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. We're going to take their statements together. Had amar hamaneh Rabbi Hida amar meshachrer chasi abdo kana one of them says that this baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who said that if someone frees half of his slave, that works. If a master gives a get yichudor to his slave and says, in this document it says, you are half free, that still works, even though he's half a slave, and therefore that half cannot acquire anything for himself. But since half of him is free, so his free half is sufficient that he can acquire the document for himself and thereby be half free. That's one statement. V'chad amar, the other sage, followed up and elaborated, "My tamad Rabbi beha," and what is the reasoning of Rabbi regarding this case of a pregnant woman, where it's not the right half and left half, or 50% of every molecule, but rather it's the fetus and the rest of her body. Kasabar ubad yerech imohu ve'naasa kemishek nala ehad me'ebareha. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi thinks that a fetus is not considered its own separate life, but rather is a limb of the mother's body. And therefore it's just like the master gave over, freed one of her limbs. The master can say, here, I'm giving you this get shichdur, so that your arm will be free, or your right half will be free. That works, and therefore it also works if the part of her body that he happens to be freeing is her fetus. And even though the fetus will be born and then will become its own separate life, and that life will be a free person, it still works, because it's not a case of one slave receiving on behalf of another slave that's owned by the same master. Those will not work. But in this case, it does work, because it's not two separate slaves, it's just two parts of one slave. All right, and we'll start the next Mishnah. Af hanashim she'enan ne'emanot lomar bet met ba'ala ne'emanot lehavi et gita hamota ubat hamota v'sarata vivimta ubat ba'ala. Very interesting Mishnah, also about who can be a messenger. Now, generally, a woman can be a messenger to receive a get or to bring a get. That's totally fine. Okay, but now we're going to see some exceptions. Now, Nashim, even those women who cannot say met ba'ala. Okay, back up a second. A woman also is believed to say that a certain person's husband has died, right? If a woman's out on a trip and sees some guy die, she can come back and tell the wife, listen, I saw your husband is dead, and the court will believe her, even though she's one witness, even though she is a woman, because we want to go the extra mile so that the wife not be an aguna. Maybe there's nobody else that saw that the husband is dead. So we believe most women to say that the husband is dead. However, there's a group of women who we are suspicious of because they have evil intent. And these are actually a woman's some of her somewhat closest relatives, or rather in-laws. Okay, so the following people are not believed to say that your husband has died. And that would be a mother-in-law, and the daughter of a mother-in-law, meaning a sister-in-law, a co-wife, and sister-in-law is from her husband's brother's wife, and it's, in other words, either her husband's sister or her husband's brother's wife, two types of sisters-in-law, and the husband's daughter, meaning a stepdaughter. All these people have some jealousy, either financial interest, because this woman will be taking some of the inheritance. For example, the mother-in-law, maybe she brought some property into her marriage when she was first married, and that means that when her husband dies, the father-in-law dies, who's going to inherit? The son. And then if the son inherits, so her daughter-in-law is going to be a beneficiary of some of the things that she brought into the marriage. And anyway, you know from common experience that the relationship between a woman and her mother-in-law and sisters-in-law are not always great, and certainly a stepdaughter is going to be, and a co-wife is certainly even worse. That her name means Sarah, means a actual pain. So all these people, because there's a likelihood that they have some enmity towards the woman, they may want to mess up her life. What's a good way to mess up someone's life? Well, you go when your husband is away on a trip, this person will come and say, oh, I saw your husband is dead. And then the wife will then remarry, maybe have children, and then her husband will come back and find that there's a big problem, and now they won't be able to remain married. They'll have to get divorced. She will be married to someone that she's not allowed to be married to and have to divorce. If they have children, they'll be mamzerim. And so you can successfully break up that marriage, get rid of this woman, and cause her tremendous, tremendous problems. Therefore, these people who have natural enmity towards a person, we do not believe them if they say they saw the husband died. All that's background. Now, this Mishnah adds to that even though we don't believe these women to say that a wife's husband died, they are believed to bring a get. If they bring a get and say, listen, I was appointed as a messenger, and here is your get, and we believe that it is valid, and we don't suspect that she forged the get and is delivering it so that the wife will go and remarry and cause problems. That is not we don't worry about that. Why? Ma ben get lemita. What's the difference between the case of divorce and the case of death, where we believe them when they bring a get, but we do not believe when they bring a report that the husband has died? Sheketav mochiach. When you have a get, you have a written document, and that adds proof. That's proof that there is a get here, and she is just bringing it. Whereas when someone comes and says your husband died, there is no documentation at all. It's all her words, and so we can't believe her words. But if she has some supporting evidence and she's just adding that I am a proper messenger, so then we can believe her. And the wife herself, she can also be a messenger, as long as she says the formula that it was written and signed in front of me. Why would she need to be a messenger? If she's there, why don't she just receive it? Oh, it could be a case where, let's say they're away in a different country, and the husband gives it to her, but he says, listen, I don't want this to take effect now, only when you get to the Bet Din. I want it to take effect in the Bet Din in Yerushalayim. And so she will carry her own get, and she is authorized as a messenger to carry her own get. And then when she gets to the Bet Din in Yerushalayim, she basically gives it to herself, or rather, it takes effect when she gets to that Bet Din, and it's authorized there. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to ask, V'hatanya, kishem she'en ne'emanot lomar met ba'ala, kach en ne'emanot lehabigita. This Mishnah contradicts a Braita, because a Braita says, just these women, these in-laws, just like they are not believed to say that a person's husband has died, so too they are not trusted to bring the get. We suspect that maybe they forge the get, or just found it or something, and it is not a valid get. Amar Rav Yosef la kasha kan ba'ares kan behosal ares. Rav Yosef explains that the Mishnah that says it's okay is talking about within Eretz Yisrael. The Braita that says it's no good is talking about when she brings it from outside the land of Israel. What's the difference? Ba'ares telava dibura dida kasamchinan mehemna. When she's bringing it from one place to the other in Eretz Yisrael, where she doesn't have to say any formula at all, so we're not relying on her words, so then we can believe her, because she's just bringing a get. So the get is there. That is proof in and of itself. If it needs to be verified, then we'll find the witnesses and we'll verify it. And so we don't have to rely on her words. She's not adding much, and she's just presenting the get. Good, then she's trusted, and that's the case of the Mishnah. Whereas the Braita that says she's not believed, that's talking about when she brings it from outside the land of Israel, where not only does she have to bring it, the physical document, she also has to say B'fanai nichtab u'b'fanai nechtam. And in that case, maybe she's lying. Maybe she did not, in fact, see it. And based on her words, we're going to use that as a pre-ratification. Well, maybe we cannot trust her, and maybe she's making it up, maybe she's lying, and so because she's not only just bringing it, but her words need to be reliable. If it's one of these in-laws, they are not reliable, and so that explains the difference. We'll start tomorrow with the challenge of Abaye that actually seems like it should be the other way around. If she needs to say the formula, then once she says the formula, that's pre-ratified and no one can ever challenge it, so that this in-law will not cause her any problems. I mean, she'll be divorced, but she won't have any possible problems of adultery if she goes and is with someone or marries somebody else. And so it should be the opposite, where when she brings it within Israel, then she may rely on it, go get married, and then someone can challenge it, and we'll find out that it was in fact forged. So we'll talk about that challenge of Abayet tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.